Hey everyone, it's Seiji here. Like many of you know, we were really lucky this past week at React to the K. We got to go to the K Factor at Lincoln Center, which was the first orchestral performance of K-pop. And we had a really good time. So if you haven't already, make sure you check out the recap video that Jared and I made. It's in the description below. But for today, we have an interview that I did with Jakob Dorof. And for those of you who don't know who Jakob is, he's a fantastic journalist. He's often credited as being one of the first journalists to talk about K-pop in Western media, and fittingly, he's part of the team that helped organize K Factor. So he helped make the artistic decisions, he helped arrange some of the pieces, and he also wrote a really cool program note which has a history of K-pop pretty much from the very beginning up till now. So we got to talk to an expert and we talked about a lot of really cool things. We talked about music theory, obviously, and we talked about what makes K-pop so adventurous. But we also talked about some bigger topics like the impact K-pop has had on Korea, on society, on the music industry, not just in Korea, but in the United States as well and around the world. So we had a really interesting conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you. So without further ado, here. So we're really excited here today. We've got a really cool guy with us. It was a major part of putting K Factor together. So today we have Jakob Dorof here. He's a writer for Pitchfork, Vice, Spotify, GQ. List goes on.
Back in the day.
On and
GQ
on.
Korea.
GQ Korea.
Big difference.
And yeah, again, he was a huge part of putting all this together. So I thought maybe we could begin with just like letting the fans get to know you a little bit,
Sure.
What your background is.
Like you said, I guess I started writing about K-pop way back when, like 2012-ish.
Yeah.
I first got into it a little bit before Gangnam Style happened. I've been aware of it for a couple of years, but really dove in early 2012, I would say. Moved to Korea at the end of 2014. Got involved in a bunch of odd job projects and things in and around the industry in Korea, and yeah, one of those, the most recent of those, has been this K Factor show, which I guess we've been working on for like basically a year. Yeah, there was a lot that went into it before it ramped up towards the end here, but yeah, what's up. And I still live in Seoul. I've been there for about 5 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what it is.
Cool. I know you're a musician, but maybe you can talk about that.
Sort of, yeah. In college, I had a very ambitious music project that was like orchestra sized. It was about 20 people, a rotating lineup, sort of. In many ways, it was kind of like NCT.
Okay.
In that it was modular and always changing. There was a lineup of it in New York and one in New Haven and Philly. And so for the first 12 or 13 years of my life, I didn't like music at all. I was a really weird kid and I just wasn't into it. I think probably like subconsciously I liked the video game music I was hearing because I was really into video games as a kid, but like stuff on the radio and stuff I just for some reason couldn't connect to. And I got really into Nirvana when I was 13, and was
like all of us, though.
Yeah, sure, and was kind of close-minded and stupid about the types of music I liked until around college hit, and then I got very into everything and became really exploratory in my listening. And the music project I had in college rewarded me like listening to as much stuff as possible. So I became really, really interested in everything and listened to music from, every decade and across the centuries and whatnot, every genre. Took a lot of classes in college about different periods or, locales of music. Felt probably erroneously like I knew a lot about music and music history around the time I found K-pop for myself in early 2012, and just felt kind of disoriented when I first checked it out, because it was sort of like it seemed to be operating by a few different kinds of logics that I hadn't really encountered before musically, and as like a business structure, like why does this group need 10 members when none of them are playing instruments, or, like, just didn't really understand any of it. Pre-Gangnam Style, again, not really anybody was covering, so it seemed to be like very low awareness about it in general. So I thought, I could write about this at first from like a business perspective mostly. I thought like some kind of big explainer of like how the whole system works could be really fascinating. In any event, I started listening to a ton of K-pop to research that, and started noticing like, wow, compositionally and production-wise, there was some really interesting stuff going on that like I hadn't really encountered in popular music or any kind of music before. And it was fascinating to me that the song could be like really visceral and fun and function as pop music, but get there in a kind of diagonal way from a Western pop perspective, with all the key changes or like the big genre bending stuff going on, or just these huge contrasts from section to section. So that was the perspective that I got really deeply interested in it, and like started writing about it, I guess, primarily from that perspective. That was a huge motivator for me in moving to Korea, really not that long after getting into it, like maybe a year and a half later. My earliest memory of it, as in like a thing I can trace to something I posted on social media, was Baby Goodnight by GD and Top, which I heard in 2010, which I think was when it came out. It was just sort of like a, K-pop kind of moment, right? I didn't really go that much deeper with it at the time. But the song that really changed everything for me was actually Shampoo by After School. Do you know that song?
I don't.
Okay. That was the one I heard in early 2012. That was really intriguing. And it's not really like formally adventurous or anything in the way of like some of the things that the Lincoln Center concert focused on. But it was different enough to strike a chord and intrigue me a bit. It's one of those K-pop songs that basically goes like, I think over a minute before the verse starts. It's just like very long instrumental intro, and it's really pretty and sweeping, and it somehow reminded me of like a Dreamcast soundtrack or something. So it just reminded me of my childhood in some ways, and it was that was the one where it was like, well, why are there so many people in this group, and how does the video look so expensive, and why haven't I heard of it before? So that's what made me really curious, and it's still a classic for me. I really, really love that song.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because one of my questions is about how adventurous K-pop music is.
Okay.
And my question was, how do you think that's possible? And are there, obviously there's a financial risk, right, to being adventurous in music, and I think we see it in the Western music industry, where you see consistent song forms.
It definitely seems that way from a Western perspective.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was first getting really into that side of it, back in 2013 at that point. Number one, noticing that stuff, and also noticing that more often than not, when I would look up like who released that song, it would be SM Entertainment.
Yeah.
They do that more than anybody, I think. I knew nothing about what SM was at that point. That really intrigued me. And I remember around the time Pink Tape by FX came out, I started talking to people who were in Korea, or Korean people, or people in the K-pop industry, being like, something's going on here. And these songs like Rum Pum 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 by FX, or I Got a Boy by Girls' Generation, some Shiny tracks from that year and whatnot, EXO, and then of course also lots of like Big Bang and G-Dragon and stuff like that too. I would tell these people like, do you know why this is happening, or like, what is this phenomenon here in the composition and production of these certain tracks? And when I would get really into it, people would be like, oh, well, like, you couldn't talk about that with like that must be a coincidence or something, because like a company like SM, they just care about money. Like, they don't care about whatever you're talking about at all. Right. And I knew that had to be wrong, because I'm like, there's no way this would happen by accident. And these are just, at least from a Western perspective, not commercially helpful decisions to make. That was basically what the concert was trying to explore. It was like, how did this start, or what were the conditions in Korea, in the market there, that allowed for this kind of music to really blossom and thrive there. In terms of that side of K-pop, and the fact that a song like, Big Bang's Bang 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 could be the number one most popular hit of 2015.
Yeah.
That seems like a bit of a phenomenon to me. I think the side of it that maybe has the most to give to the world creatively as K-pop becomes more and more influential and popular around the world and influences more creative decisions throughout Asia and in the Western world and whatnot. I think that side of it is going to be the most influential. The inflection point for modern K-pop that people generally talk about is Nanayo by Seiji in 1992.
Right.
And it, quote unquote, just so happens that song that sort of modernized K-pop in a way has this big, jump cut genre change with the heavy metal breakdown right before the pre-chorus. And there's some genre blendy things going on where it's obviously predominantly New Jack Swing, but there's some Miami freestyle synth stuff going on there, and then I would argue that in the chorus the vocal could be maybe from a Korean ballad or something like that, the top line. And so that becoming as massive as it did was an inflection point for sure, and it opened up a whole world of possibility in terms of what people could get away with and have it be the type of stuff that can sell millions of copies. There were pre-sentiments of that and importance going back to the 20s. There are certain examples that are really clear, like a major hit in 1949 called, roughly translates to Moonlight in Sheila, the Sheila Kingdom. That's a song that in the middle of it, there's an abrupt modulation and the song kind of splits in half to this kind of Phrygian mode, vaguely Middle Eastern, South Asian kind of theme. It just disrupts the flow of the song, almost in a hallucinatory kind of way. It's a really psychedelic song in general. So there were moments like that leading up to Nanayo in 1992 that made that kind of song make sense in the market in a way that if none of that other stuff had ever happened, maybe wouldn't have been the case. One of the main things that keeps fans coming back is that the music is giving them something unique, right?
Yeah.
That could be as simple as a production style or something like that, very superficial, which I think is also true. But that deeper compositional aspect to it and the logic of those songs and the way that it can continually surprise you and be a roller coaster ride, like the new Red Velvet song seems to be. I think that's a big part of it, and we thought in putting on a show with an orchestra at Lincoln Center, what better side of K-pop to focus on than something that's under-discussed, underrepresented, I think, to a large extent in the press so far.
Yeah.
And the most compositionally, musically interesting facet of K-pop, because that's going to hopefully translate the best to an orchestral experience where you don't have the singer out front, or you don't have the choreography or these other things to hold your attention.
How do you see, this concert, how do you think this changes the K-pop world? Do you think is this a turning point, or?
I would not be bold to say that. Bold enough to say that myself in any way. I think our only goal with it was to kind of use this opportunity to pay a compliment and to pay respect. It is a celebration of that side of K-pop and all that it's achieved. Voicing a bit of an optimism for where things go from here, globally, culturally, on a level that's far bigger and more important than just cool compositional techniques or whatever. I would love to see that influence Western pop. I actually posit that perhaps we're already seeing that. I think there are certain Taylor Swift songs off her most recent album, I think, that are a little bit K-poppy and a little bit out there in that way.
Yeah.
Or even just, something like Sicko Mode by Travis Scott being as popular as it is. And do I think Travis Scott or his producers are referencing K-pop tracks in the studio? Probably not, but it is a very similar structural logic.
changes have you noticed since you started covering this? Have you seen changes like regionally, musically?
I think everything's changed. Number one, I first got into it in 2012, which I think was coming at the tail end of a period where K-pop was actually pretty formally conservative by Korean market standards. January 1st was when I Got a Boy came out in 2013. And I really think that was the reopening of the floodgates of the 90s in terms of formal innovation and open-mindedness in Korean pop, and we've been on that ride ever since. That alone, I think, was a huge change pretty early on in my coverage of it. Obviously, the success of BTS has changed everything in terms of how it's received in the world, but also their success has had like a really fundamental influence on the logic of K-pop itself and the way that companies think about what's possible and what kind of sounds they go for and everything. So I think that's been a massive change that we're only beginning to understand, maybe. Korea's just changed so much in that, all right, so that is a silly example that's indicative of a larger trend, which is that international stuff in general, perhaps especially food, but just in general, is way more available now than it was in 2014 at a much higher level of quality, and with, I think, much greater discernment from the domestic market, the consumers there, than there was when I feel like I arrived at Korea at the very tail end of an era. I feel really fortunate to have caught that, just to catch what it used to be like and get a feel for that. That 2014, 2015 time was kind of the tail end of like the era when like most foreigners in Korea weren't there for Korea, they were there for a job, you know, like, and they were bitter about being there. And now it's just like those people are dinosaurs. There's not very many left of them. Everybody there loves Korea and wants to be there, and you've got this whole wave of kids who fell in love with Hallyu sometime before college, and then they studied Korean in college, and now they're moving to Korea at age 22, 23 to like do their thing there, and they're fluent in Korean, and it's just, that alone is a big change. And I think the Korean market, the Korean industry is much more aware of how cool they are, and like what they're worth really on an international level than they quite yet were by the time I got there.
What would you say is different between them and, say, a market like China or Japan or even America?
In terms of pop music?
Yeah, and like if anything else comes to mind too.
Yeah, well, it's been well covered the extent to which Korea felt in all industries like it needed to be an export industry and play to the world, not just Koreans. That's had a huge fundamental influence on the logic of K-pop as an art form, and also the way in which they marketed it internationally and ultimately succeeded in doing that, right? In a way where Japan, that just seemed like an absurd notion, like, you know, we're doing so well here at home, we don't need that. And so I think in a way J-pop is even now like a little more insular. In a way that's really interesting. I love a lot of J-pop, but I think it's a totally different thing. C-pop is really, you know, mainland China pop is really just beginning to come into its own now. I think there's a very fundamental K-pop influence in a lot of that. I'm going to be curious to see how this K-pop wave around the world opens up avenues for J-pop and C-pop and V-pop and everything else, and especially seeing how companies like JYP and SM are getting into making groups for those markets. I think fans are having this kind of question now of like, well, if SM or JYP makes a group just for China or Vietnam, is that K-pop? And like, as a K-pop fan, like, do I keep up with that or not? And my perspective is like, it's absolutely K-pop, and it's even if it's not, it's made by these, you know, canonical, crucial K-pop companies, and as somebody who wants to know everything about it, I got to keep up with it.
Yeah, it was great having you.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so you can check them out. Do you have any social media handles?
On Instagram, I'm just my name, JAKOB DOROF. I've been on Twitter since 2006 when nobody put their real name as their handle, so that's Soyrev, Soyrev. Long story. But yeah, check me out on either, and I hope to do more stuff. Maybe not exactly like this concert, but more things that are interesting in a similar way at some point.
Yeah.
So follow me, and check us out on the KBS show. It's called One Fine Day with Lena Park. I'm on Mondays. You can listen to it on the show's website, and there's an app that you can download to listen to this like KBS World Radio thing. So if you can't figure that out, ask me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to sort you through.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and if you like content like this, definitely let us know. Leave us a comment and a like. And it was really great having Jakob here.
Thank you so much, man. It's been really cool.
Hopefully more in the future.
Yeah. So whenever I'm around, I guess.
Yeah.